I would like to call our second speaker for the proposition, Emily Hall. Emily is a second-year student reading history at Robinson College, where she is the president of the Robinson College Students Association, which is what they call their JCR. She won this slot through open audition. Emily, you have the ear of the house.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Following on from Peter's speech, there was a CUSU council on Monday, and the new elections committee were elected then. How many people knew about that, out of curiosity? Ah, lovely, 2 people, 3-ish. Yeah, so anyway, continuing on that note, when a new first-year member of my JCR committee hesitantly asked in our first meeting, wait, CUSU's meant to be the union for students, right? The confusion wasn't exactly surprising. Events this academic year have put CUSU into the spotlight for its apparent inability to represent student voices. Last term, CUSU decided not to support students' right to individual choice of action during the strikes. Their disabled students officer told students that they shouldn't be crossing non-existent picket lines. Then this term, they attempted to ban some student societies from advertising at the Freshers' Fair without... Yeah?
Could I just say that the whole reason why the UCS, the University Council on Disability Resource Centre, weren't picketed at all was because of the Central Committee's efforts in working with UCU.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a shame that they didn't tell everyone else that. But they banned these societies without actually bothering to tell them, and then they seemingly rigged the NUS elections. If we're being honest, it's not really been a year that has made CUSU seem remotely representative of student interests. As a JCR president, I, like Henry, have had ample opportunity to see how CUSU works from a front row seat, although I would like to make clear now that I am speaking from a personal perspective rather than for my college or my committee. But as someone who does do their best to try and represent students, I know it's not an easy job. Just the other week, our committee received 2 emails. So the first was complimenting our canteen's genuinely spectacular curly fries, and then the second was telling us to ban chips outright because they're unhealthy. Essentially, student views can be very contradictory, but what a representative body should do in a situation like this is to try to listen to a range of student opinion and to acknowledge all sides. And this is unfortunately where CUSU fundamentally fails. A second show of hands. How many people here have attended a meeting at CUSU Council? Oh, that's actually a pretty good turnout. But I will actually expand a little bit more on what has already been said about the kind of atmosphere of CUSU. So firstly, as Peter has already highlighted, it's pretty CUSU heavy. In theory, the members of CUSU campaigns, schools representatives, part-time execs, and SABs shouldn't come close to outnumbering JCR and MCR reps. In practice, this is definitely not the case. In the first CUSU Council meeting of this term, the voting record showed that the CUSU bloc actually outnumbered the JCR and MCR reps. It's a fundamentally difficult thing to do, to have the confidence to speak up against a majority who you know will rip apart everything that you say, who will reframe your words as an attack on morality and ethical actions, rather than actually trying to understand a different perspective. What this causes is actually a profoundly unpleasant atmosphere. If I'm honest, I actually feel considerably more comfortable speaking in front of today's larger audience than I did questioning the CUSU president about the dodgy NUS elections and council on Monday. But what really sticks with me is when last term, Henry here, he challenged the thoughtless words of a disabled students officer. And instead of the feedback from his students actually being listened to, he was publicly mocked and laughed at. It was absolutely horrible and disgusting. This just demonstrates how hostile that environment is to any kind of dissenting opinion. CUSU Council is meant to be a place to speak up, a place for students to raise issues and find resolutions and be represented by their students' union. Yet the intrinsically in-crowd atmosphere of the council does nothing to facilitate that whatsoever, thus preventing it from being representative to a huge group of students. Perhaps because of this, there is a self-perpetuating cycle of the people involved in CUSU. For the most part, CUSU only has one sort of student ideology. As a member of the Labour Party, I sympathise with these beliefs. However, the intolerance towards other people's views displayed by members of CUSU has repeatedly been exclusionary and unacceptable. People with different perspectives then don't want to run for positions as they feel like outsiders. But because their voices aren't actually heard, CUSU remains unwelcoming to different perspectives. Then, as there's just one sort of voice, a lot of students don't feel represented, so as has been pointed out quite a lot already, they don't vote. Or in some cases, they vote as they want pizza, with logic as sound as, I voted for the one whose name sounded the least posh. This all results in CUSU lacking a variety of people and perspectives, and this is something that is fundamental to seeing the full picture and being able to represent a broad range of students rather than just a select few. This is not the fault of the SABs, a lot of whom I respect, like, and genuinely think try and do a really good and difficult job. Lack of representation is a fault of the CUSU institution, a fault that stems from this limited variety of people. However, let's go back to CUSU's actions on the strikes. CUSU's actions on this pertinent topic serve as a classic example of their willingness to ignore student opinion that doesn't agree with their ideological standpoint. Firstly, their position on the strikes. In October, CUSU Council passed a motion that supported striking workers. This isn't a problem. It's absolutely fair that they think working conditions are important, and these are conditions in which students learn. They also represent graduate students who acutely suffer because of precarious contracts and workloads. However, the problem with this was the lack of any provision in this motion for support of all student welfare, regardless of their political stance. This might have been resolved if not for the Council's subsequent rejection of multiple amendments that attempted to rectify this. This lack of clarification meant it maybe shouldn't have come as a surprise when that statement advising students to only attend the University Counselling Service or the Disability Resource Centre, quote, if absolutely necessary or in an emergency. Now, these students had already made the decision to seek help, and they should never have been asked to weigh the necessity of a vital medical appointment against the political value of a strike, especially by a supposedly representative student body. Put simply, for some students, the decision whether to and how to support the strikes is not simply black and white. What about medics, for whom contact hours are absolutely compulsory? Disabled students, for whom this strike is uniquely debilitating? Why should these students' voices be ignored, and why should they be made to feel guilty for being unable to, or not even wanting to, support a strike that was balloted for by staff rather than students? By not explicitly stating from the start that students have the right to choose whether to or how to support the strikes, CUSU failed to represent such students. Indeed, despite its assertion that it condemns harassment and abuse towards all students, it encouraged students to join the Facebook page StrikeBridge, which many of you may be familiar with. And whilst it was useful in many regards, such as book swapping, it also featured language such as big scab energy, which wasn't called out by any of the SABs who were active on the groups. Secondly, let's mention how little information they actually gave to students and to JCRs about the strikes. Instead of actually informing anxious students about an extremely important issue, in most of their email correspondence, CUSU prioritized getting their one-sided CUSU proposal past the student body, a proposal which scraped only a 13.5% voter turnout despite pizza being promised. It was more than halfway through this strike period when CUSU realized that they maybe should have let the international students know that missing multiple contact hours could violate their visa terms, leading to them actually being deported. Let's also mention that some of the information they gave was simply wrong. The original claim that the UCS and the DRC would be picketed, this was incorrect. No physical picket line was on Bennett Street. An apology wasn't quick in coming either, issued to CUSU Council only under duress after a refusal to apologize mere minutes previously. In a final insult to many students affected by this confusing and arguably incorrect information provided by CUSU, their corrected statement was hidden in the middle of an email, actually very similar to the information about the NUS delegate elections. Indeed, this reluctance to apologize and reluctance to be held accountable could not have been more evident than in those recent NUS delegate elections, where a worrying disregard was shown to those, like Peter, who ran from outside of this CUSU bubble. And as much as they'd love to see the outcome as having been unprecedented, surely when you're running a complicated election, you have to actually plan for how to handle it? This aside, it was really great that Edward responded so quickly to this debate. a response to say that the CUSU SABs had nothing to do with it, and direct people straight to the Elections Committee via their email address. The only slight issue with that is that you'll never guess who was actually on the Elections Committee. Yes, Edward, the President himself. And the next thing that they did was release a statement that essentially said, we used STV correctly, go look it up. Unfortunately, they did this without looking up the rules themselves and realizing that they'd completely violated them. And they had to release a second statement after significant pressure was put on them and an appeal was launched. Oops. Another oops moment actually could probably be seen when they decided to ban the military student-run societies and sort of forgot to mention it to them, as has been discussed already. And from all of this, it can fundamentally be seen that CUSU are not representing their students. While they may frequently do a lot right, they fund the Students' Advice Service. They provide an invaluable role in training JCR and MCR officers. This is overshadowed by the atmosphere that has been created that means that our students' union is not actually a union for students. It's an atmosphere that has made it difficult to hold them accountable when they neglect students' interests. As such, I would urge you to vote in proposition of this motion. Thank you.